What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is of course my Academy Awards 1950s Best Picture winners ranked from worst to best. Now I've already focused on the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, so of course it's time for the 1950s, baby. So my number 10 is going to be the worst, my number 1 is going to be the best, and of course I'm looking forward to hear your guys' ranking of the 1950s Academy Award Best Picture winners ranked from worst to best. So all that exposition aside, let's get started. So my number 10 is The Greatest Show on Earth, which I'm going to say right now, The Greatest Show on Earth is the worst Best Picture winner that I have ever seen. For a lot of people, they say Crash is the worst Best Picture winner that they've ever seen, and I disagree. The Greatest Show on Earth is one of the worst. It is literally just a vignette of characters in a circle just walking with an animal, just literally walking in a circle, in a circus. That is the movie. It's like, oh, this person's in it. Oh, this person's in it. It's just such a terrible movie. I really did not like this movie at all. I gave it like a 1 out of 5 star rating. I did not like it at all. And that's why it's my number 10. Kicking into number 9, we have Around the World in 80 Days. Nope, not the one with Jackie Chan. The one that came out in 1956. That one. Yeah, that movie is almost 3 hours long, and it feels it. It is so painfully dull. Similar to The Greatest Show on Earth, there isn't much that happens. It's pretty much going from continent to continent, and the thing is, that's fine, but it feels like it's just kind of like, almost like pulling out the 1517 of Paris, where it's literally just going from location to location, and either like advertising or just kind of showing off the view of like, oh wow, look, we're here. Oh wow, look, we're here, without really actually adding anything to the story. Which is unfortunate because, again, yes, the scenery is beautiful, but it's backed up by like emptiness. It's a very, very like 0 calorie type movie experience. Like, you don't gain anything from this movie in the slightest. I did not like this movie at all, and that's why it is my number 9. My number 8 is An American in Paris. Listen, American in Paris, I personally am not a big fan of. I know a lot of people that are, but the thing is, An American in Paris, it shows off the talents of Gene Kelly. Gene Kelly was a very talented actor. However, fact of the matter is, I felt like the movie needed more than just Gene Kelly dancing. There's literally a 10-15 minute sequence at the end, I believe it's that long, of him just like dancing, and it's like, cool, that's pretty cool, but I felt like the story was almost non-existent, and it didn't feel like an art house movie where it's just like a slice of life. It felt more like, this is just the style of how we do things, and it's something that you saw in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, honestly, with musicals. I felt like in the later half of this century is when people kind of realized, listen, musicals, it's fine to have music in musicals. That's completely fine. But you kind of have to have a story. And I felt like this movie just didn't really realize that. And it also just was poorly developed in terms of characters. I personally think. Again, I know some people are going to disagree highly with that because I know it's a beloved movie. It's considered a classic. I know a lot of people that love it. I personally just didn't like it and found it to be very disappointing. And that's why it's my number 8. So that was my number 8. My number 7 is From Here to Eternity, which the interesting thing about From Here to Eternity is similar to some 1940s movies. From Here to Eternity is less than 10 years after World War II, and it's fascinating because it's like, okay, that's probably when they have the most information because it's still fresh in everyone's minds. But what do you instead do? You focus on a romance, which is fine on paper. However, the way that they executed the romance in this movie, it just was like, oh my goodness. Especially because when they don't focus on the romance, they actually focus on the other stuff in the movie. The other stuff in the movie is great. It's just when it focuses on the other stuff that's kind of like, oh my goodness. I personally was not impressed with From Here to Eternity. I don't think it's a good movie. I think it's a movie that has great performances and has like glimmers of greatness, but unfortunately is several shades short of that. I think it's a movie that I would recommend lightly, but I don't think it's a good movie, and it's why it's lower on this list at number 7. Number 6 is Gigi, which I didn't like it. I'm not even really going to talk about it. There's not much to talk about it. It's another musical. It's similar to other musicals that I mentioned about literally also in this review, where it's got those musical numbers, but it doesn't have much else, honestly. No real substance to speak of. And that's why it's my number 6. Number 5 is Marty, which is a rock-solid movie. I like this movie. I don't think it's great by any means, but I respect it, and I think it is kind of cool that it won Best Picture. Given the topics and everything, I think it's especially interesting. But not a great movie, but definitely an entertaining movie. Like, you can watch it and show it to anyone, and I'm sure everyone will be entertained because there are a lot of funny things in it, and that's why it is my number 5. My number 4 is Ben-Hur, which is a very long movie, but I respect the heck out of it. It's groundbreaking in terms of visual effects. They used a lot of practical effects. It's groundbreaking also the fact that it was like, an epic winning Best Picture, which is really cool. But more importantly, I think it's a movie that's really fascinating because it just brought the world together. I mean, when this movie came out, everyone loved it based on critical and, just audience members' reactions. It's just awesome to see a movie like that win Best Picture. I personally, I think I need to watch it again. I liked it, but I haven't seen it in years, and I do feel like it might age even better for me. But as someone that hasn't seen it in like 5+ years, I remember really liking it. I remember being impressed with it visually. And I do think the story was good with what it was going for. That's why it's my number 4. My number 3 is The Bridge on the River Kwai, which I think it's a great movie. I need to watch it. I need to see it a second time. But I just remember it being a movie that is so in tune with suspense and how to direct suspense. It's a movie that builds and builds and builds to that conclusion that lasts 5 minutes. And that 5-minute conclusion is just greatness on screen. I want to rewatch it just because it's such a great movie. It's a little long for sure, but it's a movie that has so many great ideas, and it just builds so well to that climax that you just can't help but get taken in with everything that's going on screen. I would highly recommend this movie. It's really good, and that's why it's my number 3. My number 2 is All About Eve, which it's interesting because I have All About Eve so high up, but the interesting thing is that I think Sunset Boulevard should have won Best Picture and not All About Eve. But that being said, All About Eve I think is still a great movie. It's a great movie about Hollywood. It's not the best. I still think that might be Mulholland Drive. But All About Eve is one of the first movies to focus on that, like, exclusively. And I think it does it in such a very fascinating way. At the same time, it has killer performances. I really dig the acting. The writing is incredible. There are so many quotable lines. I would highly recommend it. If you haven't seen All About Eve, highly, highly recommend it. I do want to see it a second time because it has been a little bit, but I remember being like really surprised at how good it was. And that's my number 2. Now my number 1, if you're in tune with Best Picture winners of the 1950s, you probably know what my number 1 is, and it's On the Waterfront. On the Waterfront is a great movie. Listen, my number 2, my number 3 pick season could have been my number 1, but there's just certain scenes that I always come back to in remembrance of On the Waterfront. And I think it's a very important movie. Like I mentioned about, 2 and 3, having good messages and everything. Or at least surface based, I said that. But number 1 is a movie that really, really takes messages to whole nother level. Because it's dealing with topics that still to this day are very relevant. And I think that's why this movie's held up so well, because of that. It deals with themes and characters that in everyday life. I absolutely love the climax as well in On the Waterfront. I think it's a very, very well acted movie. And at the same time, it just has such an impact on you overall. Like when that ending hits, it's something else, man. I've seen it a couple times. I do want to watch it again, but the couple times I saw it, I was really impressed with it. And I'm sure you guys will be too. So that is my, 1950s Best Picture winners ranked from worst to best. Guys, let me know yours in the comment section down below. I'm going to be doing, obviously 1960s next, so stay tuned for that. And as always, if you have any further questions, comment section down below. And don't forget the subscription, notification bell, and I'll get you guys later.